Right, grade 12. The next topic that we're going to look at is South Africa's endeavours. You will see if you look on your exam guideline, this is actually your a possible essay question. All right, but as I mentioned before, regional development was asked as an essay last year. The specific question was asked as an essay last year. So it will definitely not be your essay question this year again. Okay, just remember, because it is earmarked as an essay question, it will be definitely, not, if it's not there as an essay question, it will be there in section B. All right, so obviously as a data response question or discuss for 8, they love asking IDZs as a data response question for 10 marks. All right, so make sure that you know this section also really, really well. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at is the SDI, okay, Spatial Development Initiatives or SDI. Okay, you have your definition there in your block. Okay, your SDI is an area with high levels of unemployment and poverty, but it has been identified by the government for a coordinated effort to develop the potential of the area. All right, so remember when we spoke about regional development, we said that the government has to identify underdeveloped areas in our country. So countries that are, or areas in the country that is currently underdeveloped, but it does have the potential for higher levels of development. So the SDI is what we call that identified area. All right, so those areas in our country that is underdeveloped at the moment but has potential for growth, those areas are called the SDIs, okay, Spatial Development Areas. Okay, so the SDI is an interdepartmental investment strategy. Obviously, we said that industrial development will fall under the auspices of the Department of Trade and Industry. So obviously the one department that will be in charge of the SDI initiatives will be the Department of Trade and Industry, but they work in conjunction also with the Department of Transport. Now the idea behind the SDIs, okay, once we have identified these underdeveloped areas with potential, the idea is that we create economic growth, that we create industrial development in these undeveloped areas, mainly through private sector investment. So the idea is not that the government will fund this initiative on their own. The idea is that they will encourage private businesses to be established in these spatial areas, these underdeveloped areas. Okay, but obviously the government does provide certain incentives. Generally speaking, private sector investment will happen in the centralized areas. If you want a business to be established in a more remote, underdeveloped area, you are going to have to give them a reason to want to be there. So the government encourages the establishment of private sector businesses in these areas through different incentives. Okay, the next section we're actually going to look at what those incentives are. All right, but the idea is not that the government must fund this industrial development, not at all. The government provides certain incentives, yes, to make it more attractive for private businesses to want to establish in these undeveloped areas, because generally they don't want to. All right, but the idea is that the money for industrial development must come from the private sector. Okay. Now, SDIs is focused on the greater Southern African region, okay, as I said in 2 of the previous lessons. Obviously, yes, we focus on creating industrial development in South Africa, but we also hope that this industrial development will spill over into the region of Southern Africa as well. All right, 2 of our corridors, we'll talk about the corridors later, okay, SDIs, that also spills over, that starts in South Africa but spills over into Southern Africa. The first one is the Maputo Development Corridor. Okay, that's a corridor that goes from South Africa into Mozambique. And then also the Lubombo Initiative, which goes from South Africa into Mozambique and also Swaziland. All right. And a very important other feature of the SDI program is the PPPs, the private-public partnerships, which obviously means that some of the investment some of the money will come from the government side, some of the money will come from the private sector side. Okay, if you look at your exam guideline, you'll see it says discuss spatial development initiatives in South Africa and link them to the private-public partnerships. Okay, so that is exactly what we are going to do. All right, what is the objectives, firstly, of the SDI? Okay, obviously we want to develop physical infrastructure. Okay, physical infrastructure would be things like transport infrastructure, communications, electricity. Okay, so obviously in these underdeveloped areas, before any private sector investment will happen there, no business is going to go and settle itself in an area where there's no roads, there's no communications networks, there's no electricity, there's no running water. No private business in their right mind will establish themselves in an area like that. And in many cases, these underdeveloped areas don't have the necessary infrastructure. All right, so it is from the government side, it is their responsibility to make sure that the physical infrastructure is actually provided. Okay, once the infrastructure is there, okay, they've built the roads right up to the area. There's railways, there's harbours if it's relevant, or the people can get to the harbours. There's electricity network, there's communications networks, there's Wi-Fi signal. Okay, all the physical infrastructure is in place. Obviously, the overall objective is to stimulate economic activity in those undeveloped areas. The purpose here is regional development through industrial development. So we want to encourage industrial development in the underdeveloped areas so that we can have a more equal distribution of economic activities across the country. So the idea is that once we have identified these SDIs, these underdeveloped areas with potential, then obviously we want to stimulate economic activity. Okay, in the same time, we also want to create employment, because mostly these underdeveloped areas, remember, it will be areas where there's high levels of poverty and unemployment because there's no industrial development. There is not a lot of job opportunities available for the people either. All right, so by stimulating industrial development, by encouraging the establishment of new businesses, automatically it will also stimulate job creation, which will then obviously mean that people from the local area will find jobs and poverty levels can decrease as well. Now, what is very important is we say that we identify these underdeveloped areas with potential. All right, so what we need to do is once we've identified these underdeveloped areas, obviously we need to see what potential is there. We can't just decide we're going to stimulate all industries. Now we're going to stimulate agriculture, we're going to stimulate mining, we're going to do tourism, we're going to do retail, all industries that we can think of, we're going to start them in these underdeveloped areas. It doesn't work like that. We have to see what the potential of the area is. If there's no minerals there, you can't stimulate a mining industry. If the climatic conditions is not suitable for agriculture, it doesn't help that you go and invest a whole bunch of money in establishing an agricultural industry that is not going to work there. If there's no tourist attractions close by, we can't stimulate tourism. All right. So we literally need to see what is available, what resources are available in these underdeveloped areas, which industries will do really well in this particular area. All right. So we have to find the potential of, and each area will be different. Okay. Then we want to restructure the apartheid economy. Remember, we said that the unequal distribution of economic activities between the regions of the country is as a result of the policy of the previous government of centralization. All right, so we want to restructure the economy. We want to counter the policies that they used by now having a more equal distribution of economic activities. Then, as I said, these investments are supposed to happen as a result of private sector investment. Okay, so the idea is not that the money would all come from the government. The idea is that most of the funding of this SDI will actually come from private sector investment, whether it's local investors, whether it's foreign investors, that doesn't matter. Okay, but it's private sector investment. The government wants to encourage businesses to establish in these underdeveloped areas. So entrepreneurs will use their own funding and they will establish businesses in this area. As I said, whether it's a local business person starting a local business or whether it's a foreign direct investment where foreigners open businesses in our country. Okay, and then lastly, it's important also to establish public-private partnerships, okay, the PPPs. Remember, the whole idea is that the government will give certain things, they provide certain incentives, they will provide the infrastructure, and then obviously from the private sector side, they must bring their own investment. All right, so the PPPs, basically what it boils down to is from the public sector side, from the government side. As I said, they provide, and now I want you to actually write this down, okay? I was sure it's somewhere, but I'm just now it's not in your book, so I'd rather just write it down because it's on your guidelines specifically. So from the public sector side, the government must provide the money, the investment, to provide the infrastructure, right? To make sure that the physical infrastructure is provided in this area, that there is a solid supply of electricity, clean water that is necessary for the factory, those strategic things, transport, that the roads go up to the factory, that there's some or other communications network, whether it's data cables, whether it's Wi-Fi, doesn't matter, but there must be physical infrastructure, sanitation, that kind of stuff, right? The money to provide infrastructure must come from the government side. Because as I said, no business will establish itself in an area if the infrastructure is not there. And provision of infrastructure is the responsibility from the government. Okay, so the money for infrastructure comes from the public sector, but the money to open the business, the money to build the factory, the money to buy the raw materials, the money to pay the workers, the money to start a business, that initial capital to start the business, that money has to come from the private sector. All right, so the entrepreneur must have his own financing to start his own business. And that's where the partnership comes in, right? The government does something, they pay for the infrastructure. The private sector does something, they pay for the establishment of their own business and the running of their own business. That's the partnership. All right, not all money from the government, some money from the government, some incentives even from the government, but the private sector investment, the entrepreneurs must have their own funding, either their own money that they've saved or they can apply for a loan from the bank, but it has to be private funding. They fund the start of their own business. Okay, the list of SDIs that is currently in place, okay, you can just work through this, know some of these examples, okay, you will see on your exam guideline document, it says specifically, name the various SDIs and corridors, and you must be able to identify them on a map. Okay, you will see sometimes in a data response question, they will give you a map and they will ask you which SDI is presented by number A on the map or whatever the case may be. Okay, so place them on a map. Okay, go and Google where these towns are if you don't know them. All right, but you have to know there's different SDIs. You have to be able to identify them. You have to be able to list different corridors. All right, so that is important as well. Okay, so what is the list? We have the Maputo Development Corridor. As I said, that is one that stretches across the borders of our country. It starts in Gauteng. It goes all the way to Maputo. I'm going to give you more information on this now. The Lebombo SDI, that goes from St. Lucia in Natal up to Ponta de Oro, that is in Mozambique. Okay, so the Lebombo SDI also stretches across our borders. Then we have the Richards Bay SDI, that stretches from Richards Bay to Durban, that is in Natal. Then we have the Durban-Pietermaritzburg zones, also in Natal. The Wild Coast SDI, okay, that's in the previously the Transkei, but it's Eastern Cape now. Fish River SDI, Eastern Cape. The West Coast Investment Initiative, that goes from Atlantis to Saldanha, that's in the Western Cape. The Platinum SDI in Rustenburg. Phalaborwa SDI, obviously in Phalaborwa. The Coast to Coast Corridor, that goes from Walvis Bay in the Western Cape via Johannesburg all the way to Maputo, also stretching across the borders of South Africa. And then there's the Gauteng SEZ. Okay, we will talk about the SEZ in detail later. Right, so there's your different SDIs, okay, in this table, just the different focus areas. Now, remember I said that once they've identified the SDI, the underdeveloped area, obviously they want to see what the focus points are. Now, what industries are they going to stimulate? What potential exists in this area? All right, so if we look at the different SDIs, you'll see there's your list of SDIs. In the KwaZulu-Natal SDI, as I said, that goes from Richards Bay down to Durban, and the focus points there is their harbours. Yeah? So transport, exports is their focus area. The Fish River SDI, the focus there is the auto industry cluster, so car manufacturing, car parts manufacturing, supply development, and then timber processing and forestry. The Lubombo corridor, okay, that is for agricultural tourism. Okay, so both agriculture and tourism. It's for education, arts and crafts, cultural events, commercial and agricultural sectors. The Wild Coast SDI also focuses on agricultural tourism as well as forestry. The Maputo Development Corridor, because this one is so big, it stretches all the way into Mozambique. This includes infrastructure. Basically, what the corridor is a highway. There's a highway that literally stretches from Johannesburg in Gauteng, and it goes all the way across the borders into Maputo. So it is used for transport. Okay, a lot of goods transport where Mozambique will import goods and stuff through the South African harbours. And on the Maputo corridor, the transport of the goods will happen from South Africa into Maputo, into Mozambique. All right. So the infrastructure specifically that I refer to is obviously the harbours, but also the road, the highway that stretches from us up to Maputo. Okay. It also focuses on agriculture, mining, tourism. Okay. There's big tourism from South Africa to Mozambique. Okay. Large amounts of tourism to Mozambique actually comes from South Africa. Okay, so big focus area is also tourism as well as manufacturing. Okay, manufacturing in South Africa and then obviously transporting up to Mozambique. The Richards Bay SDI, that includes the Durban and Pietermaritzburg nodes, that is for industrial projects, manufacturing basically, aluminium, heavy minerals, chemicals, wood and sugar clusters, projects in tourism as well. Durban obviously is a big, one of our biggest domestic tourist attractions. People that travel within our country, obviously a lot of them goes to Natal, okay, the Durban area. So obviously a big focus area can be tourism as well. All right, the West Coast Investment Initiative, that is for fishing and harbours, okay, so obviously exports. The Platinum SDI, tourism, also manufacturing, agriculture and mining. Okay, platinum, you can see it in the name. Platinum is a mineral, okay, so obviously the focus area, if you have to guess, would be mining. Phalaborwa SDI, also mining and agriculture. Coast to coast corridor, also agriculture and then tourism. All right, obviously at the coast, everybody goes to the sea, so tourism is a logical guess. All right, then if we include the IDZs, which we will talk about in detail just now, okay, there's 4 IDZs that have been identified. There's one in Kucha, one in East London, one Saldanha, one Richards Bay, and all of them, the purpose is industrial development. Okay, but we'll talk about that in detail now. Then the special economic zones, or the SEZs, also we'll talk about that now. We only have one currently, I've mentioned that before, and that is the Gauteng SEZ. That is a second generation HDI. Okay, so it's an HDI. The SEZ is not situated in an underdeveloped area. You can think for yourself, Gauteng is definitely not underdeveloped. Okay, it is a second generation SDI. The focus is not on industrial development as such. The focus is on high-tech manufacturing. Okay, so manufacturing where we use the latest and greatest technology, IT, information technology, telecommunications, food processing, cultural activities. Those are the focus areas of the Gauteng SEZ. Okay, now this program, the SDI as such, has not been 100% successful in the case, or in terms of it hasn't really attracted a huge amount of investment. Okay, the objective was to mobilize private sector investment to create industrial development, and it has failed in the sense that investment hasn't been really high. All right, so they haven't been able to attract all of those private sector investments to create industrial development. The most successful SDIs is the West Coast Investment Initiative, and that one is in the Western Cape. Okay, that's the SDI. The second focus of this essay question, you'll see it's there to discuss the industrial development zones, or the IDZs in South Africa. All right, so that is what we are going to do now. Okay, IDZ, or industrial development zone. There's your definition, obviously very important. And I said before that they love asking the IDZ in a data response question. Remember, it will not be an essay this year. So a data response question is definitely on the cards. Look through the old exam papers, see how they normally ask this. Okay, so what is an IDZ? It is a geographically designed, purposely built, physically enclosed industrial estate that is linked to an international air airport or harbour. Okay, now, so what is the IDZ? It is an area, okay, an area that was identified by the government. It is physically enclosed. In other words, there's a wall around it. There's controlled access. Anybody cannot just come in and out of this IDZ. There is controlled access, and it is always linked to either an international harbour or an international airport. Okay, now the main focus of the IDZ, the idea with the establishment of IDZs, the hope of the government was to attract FDIs, foreign direct investments. Okay, so they wanted to create industrial development through foreign investment. They wanted foreign companies to come and open industries inside of our IDZs. Okay. Now, obviously, as I said, there has to be incentives. If you want to force a business to open in a particular area, you have to give them a reason to want to be there. And the incentive to encourage businesses to settle themselves inside an IDZ is this one. Okay, they have a duty-free incentive. Okay, so this means that IDZs fall outside of domestic customs zones. So any business that is willing to establish inside of an IDZ will be allowed to import whatever they need. Okay, if they need machinery, if they need raw materials, anything they need to import, they can import from any other country without having to pay any import tax, customs duties, and no trade restrictions will apply. All right, so if there's a ban on something, we are not a quota, we're not allowed to import stuff. If you settle inside of an IDZ, you can import whatever you need for your production. It can't be for anything. Whatever you need for your production process. You are allowed to import unlimited quantities and no customs duty. All right, but the catch is, that is the advantage, right? You don't pay customs duties, you get the duty-free incentive. But the catch is that whatever you produce inside of this IDZ, it will be exported to foreign countries. So the goods that are produced by the industries inside of an IDZ generally will be exported, obviously, which means that we will earn foreign exchange, creating that injection into the economy, increasing our income. This is why they want to encourage it. All right, they want to stimulate growth. They want to establish industries, whatever they produce, because they do not pay customs duties, they have to export. Okay, now the fact that they don't pay the customs duties, this duty-free incentive, this means that it makes them more competitive. Okay, remember, when we export our goods, it has to be a good quality and it has to be reasonably priced. Other countries are not going to buy from us if our prices are too high. So by not allowing them not to pay customs duties, it is an expense that they don't have, so their production cost is lower, which means their selling prices can be lower, which makes them more competitive, which means other countries will buy from us, so our exports will increase. All right, what are the aims of the IDZ program? The goals. As I said, we want to attract new investment, specifically foreign investment, into our export industries. Okay, remember that's the catch. Whatever you produce inside of an IDZ, it has to be exported. So this IDZ program, it's got two advantages. The idea is that it will create new investment, foreign investment specifically, and the goal is to increase our exports. Okay, it's a way of encouraging our exports, okay, export promotion. Then it will also encourage economic growth, because obviously the purpose is industrial development. We want to establish new industries. And when we establish new industries, obviously new industries are going to produce new products. Our total production is going to increase, and then that will lead eventually to economic growth. And the beauty of it all is we are going to create economic growth in our country by attracting foreign investments. So foreigners are going to give us the money to stimulate economic growth in our country. That was the hope. The hope is that we want to attract foreign investment. Okay, the idea is also to make our local industries more competitive. I explained that. Remember, I said with this duty-free incentives, the fact that they are not paying customs duties means that their production costs are lower, which means their prices will be lower, and that makes them more competitive on the international market. because the produce of the industries in the IDZ has to be exported. So obviously it can be used to promote exports. That is a big advantage as well. It promotes job creation. Any industrial development will create job creation. Okay, not just development inside of an IDZ, but the fact that we are opening new industries, we are opening new businesses inside of an IDZ. New businesses cannot function unless they've got workers. All right. So obviously, when we establish new industries, when we do industrial development, automatically also it is going to lead to job creation. All right, also very important, an aim is to promote and develop links between domestic and zone-based industries. Okay, so those industries that are established inside of an IDZ, the idea is that they must form links with businesses, local businesses outside of the IDZs. So not all of the goods that the inputs will be imported. Okay, if they use raw materials, some of those raw materials will be used locally, they will be sourced locally. So if a business in an IDZ grows and they're buying more raw materials from our local industries, it gives the opportunity for our local industries also to grow and expand, creating even more economic growth. Okay, so the idea is, yes, they can import whatever they want, but some of the inputs, it will definitely be sourced from local sources, and links will develop between those businesses in the IDZ and also the local businesses, which gives the opportunity to the local businesses to also grow. And then lastly, to enable the exploitation of our resource-intensive industries, as I said, as far as possible, your resources, your natural resources will be sourced locally. It will be mainly your your machinery and equipment that will be imported. Most of the resources will be sourced locally, which means obviously we can exploit our local resources, which will stimulate those resource-intensive industries as well, meaning they can grow and expand and create more jobs and stimulate economic growth in the country as well. Okay, the characteristics of an IDZ. Okay, we said they are purpose-built. This comes basically straight from the definition. Okay, so they are built for the specific purpose of becoming an IDZ. They are physically enclosed. As I said, there's a wall around it. There's controlled access. They are always linked to an international harbour or airport. And they are classified as duty-free import areas because any business that is settled inside of this IDZ doesn't have to pay customs duties on anything that they import that they're physically using in their production process. Okay, what are the opportunities that is offered to new businesses? Okay, so what are the advantages that we are providing for businesses that is settling inside of this IDZ? First of all, there's a good infrastructure. Physical infrastructure is there. It is upgraded all the time. It is top-notch, all right? So the infrastructure inside of this IDZ, the transport, the communications, the electricity, the water supply is of the highest standard, and they work effectively. It's efficient. They have access to infrastructure guaranteed, all right? Then they have their own dedicated customs support services to make the inspection and clearing more efficient. Okay, now how imports work. If I have a business and I import something, I'm here in Krugersdorp, I'm not inside of an IDZ, and I import something. Okay, it arrives at, let's say, Durban Harbour in a container. There's lots of ships that arrive with lots of containers. Okay, there's customs officials that have to check. They have to open the containers. They have to check the stuff inside. They have to count it. They have to make sure there's no illegal goods. They have to count it. They have to weigh it, whatever, in order to calculate the customs duty that I have to pay. The import tax that I have to pay on the stuff that I have now imported. All right. Now, obviously, there's not enough customs officials. So sometimes, literally, if I import something, that container might sit at that harbour for 6 months before the customs officials actually opens the container to check the stuff inside. So it could be that the stuff that I've imported is sitting there at the harbour for 6 months before I can actually get them. But if you're in an IDZ, you have a dedicated customs person. So your container, when your container arrives, it doesn't go and wait in the queue for inspection. You have your own dedicated customs support service immediately. Once that container arrives, immediately they will open it. They will check for contraband. They will count the stuff and do whatever. So you don't have to wait. This is a big advantage. It's much more efficient. All right. Obviously, the duty-free imports we've discussed, okay, the very fact that once you're settled in an IDZ, that you are allowed to import anything used in your production process free from customs duties, that is a big advantage, all right, because it decreases your production cost. Those things that you source from inside of South Africa, the rest of us, if I have a business in Krugersdorp, any raw materials that I buy, I have to pay VAT. Everybody has to pay VAT. But if you are settled inside of an IDZ, any raw materials that you buy from local sources, you are excluded from VAT. Okay, the stuff that you buy is zero rated, which means that you do not pay VAT. So on imported stuff, you don't pay customs duties. On local stuff, you don't pay VAT. Okay, that is a big, big saving. Obviously, the purpose is to decrease the production cost to make them more competitive. All right. Now, ideally, we said that the intention is that any goods produced inside of an IDZ will be exported. But obviously, if the demand for exports is not there, they will be allowed to sell locally. But locally, it will be sold as an imported product. All right, so it will not be sold as a local product. It will be sold as an imported product, which means the people locally that buy will also have to pay a customs duty. Even though you never paid the customs duty, when you sell your finished goods in South Africa, it will be regarded as imported goods. All right. Obviously, they are offered certain incentives. The duty-free incentives is one of those. We're going to look at the other incentives in the next lesson. Okay, reduced taxes and exemption of taxes for certain activities and products. Okay, exemption on customs duties, exemptions on VAT. Okay, so they don't pay as much tax as what any other business. If you settle outside of an IDZ, you have to pay the full package of taxes. If you settle inside of the IDZ, the government gives you certain tax exemptions and certain reduced taxations in other cases. And then, as I said, because they've got the latest and greatest technology or infrastructure, obviously, they have access to the latest information technology, global communications, the best kind of transport, the best infrastructure in general. Okay, the last thing in terms of the IDZs, the examples, we did discuss them in that previous table as well. There's the OR Tambo International Airport one, but this is an SEZ. Okay, this one is an SEZ. It's not really an IDZ. Remember, your SEZ is second generation's IDZs. So technically it's an IDZ, but it's actually an SEZ. Then in Richards Bay, the Richards Bay IDZ focuses on metals. The Kucha one near PE, that focuses on steel and automotive components. That is obviously where the car manufacturing industry is located. The Saldanha Bay SDI focuses on steel as well. It is close to that one. And then the East London one, also close to EPE, also focuses on automotive and general manufacturing. This is generally the area where the car manufacturing industry is happening. All right, then if we look at the SEZs just very quickly, okay, the special economic zones or the SEZs. Remember I said this is a second generation IDZ, okay? There is your definition. Okay, obviously the definition is important. The SEZ is again a zone, a specific geographical area that is set aside to target specific economic activities that is supported by special arrangements, which normally is different from those that apply to the rest of the country. So again, an SEZ is also, same as an IDZ, it is enclosed, it is a specific area that is set aside for industrial development, specific economic activities will be concentrated on, but there are special arrangements, there are special incentives, okay, special things that apply to businesses in an SEZ that businesses outside of an SEZ will not have access to. Now, certain advantages are given to businesses established in an SEZ, then those advantages will not be offered to businesses that is outside of an SEZ. All right, the difference, and this is important as well, they like asking this, the difference between an IDZ and an SEZ is that an IDZ focuses basically on exports. All right, remember we said any business that is established in an IDZ basically are encouraged to export their products, and they are always attached to an international airport or harbour. With an SEZ, they can be located anywhere, so they don't have to be attached to an airport or an harbour, and they're not focusing only on exports. Okay, obviously some of their stuff can be exported, it's not excluded, but an SEZ has a wider industrial development objective. The objective is not only to concentrate on exports. Okay, so the government wants for the new SEZ program to enable the development of new industrial regions. Okay, so they want to, again, remember the focus is still on stimulating underdeveloped areas. Now we need to uplift underdeveloped areas, create jobs and reduce poverty in those areas. So basically they want to create new industrial regions. So they want to create industrial development in areas where there isn't any, and they want to improve the performance of your existing IDZs as well, because the IDZs hasn't been very successful. All right. Again, investments are complemented by incentive packages. So in the same way, the same incentives that can be offered to an IDZ, the same incentives will be offered for the SEZs as well. Remember, I did say if you want to prescribe or encourage businesses to establish in a specific location, obviously you are going to have to give them a reason to want to be there. You have to give them something, and those will be the incentives that they receive. All right. The aims of the SEZs is to promote rapid development. Okay, obviously, we are going to identify key growth areas where we want the industrial development to take place. And then by attracting investment, again, private sector investment, local investment, foreign investment, to encourage industrial development in these identified areas so that economic development and economic growth can happen quickly. Rapid means fast. Now, we don't want it to take 70 years. We want investment to happen, we want industrial development to happen, and we want it to happen quickly. All right, we want to see an improvement in growth and development quickly. Then also to enable the development of new industrial regions, okay, through the establishment of new industrial hubs. Okay, as I said, obviously, we need to identify these underdeveloped areas. They want to focus development in these underdeveloped areas so that these underdeveloped areas can become highly industrialized areas, which it isn't now. The idea is to draw investments into it so that we can create new industrial areas on top of the ones that we have already got. Okay, it can be used for export promotion. Remember, I mentioned there in the first paragraph, it can be. It doesn't have to be. The IDZ focuses purely on exports. The SEZ can focus on exports, but it can also focus on any other objectives like enterprise development, like urban renewal, like rural development, like regional production, like regional development. It's got a wider objective. It can be used for various purposes. All right. And then the last thing for this essay question is the corridors. All right. Just again, I refer you back to your guideline. It says briefly discuss corridors in South Africa. Okay, you must make the list, the list of the different corridors that exist. The corridors basically relate to the SDI. Okay, so what is a corridor? Okay, there's your definition, always very important. If you think of when we talk about a corridor, okay, at school, when you refer to corridors, it is the passages. The passages, the areas that link A block to the B block. You move through a corridor to get from A block to B block. Now that is exactly what a corridor is. It is a piece of land that forms a passageway that allows access from one area to another. All right, so basically there's two developed areas. The corridor is the piece of land between the two developed areas, and the corridor itself is underdeveloped. All right, so it's a piece of land that connects one area to another, a passageway. Okay. So it offers efficient and high density production. Again, it has different focus areas. Okay, it can focus on agriculture or mining or manufacturing or tourism. All right. So it doesn't matter what the focus area is. Again, we're going to identify what is the existing potential in this area. Which industries can we focus on in this corridor to create the development that we want? Okay, there's two different types of corridors. Corridors that happen within the borders of South Africa, and obviously corridors that stretches beyond the borders of South Africa. Okay, now we keep saying that we support regional development in Southern Africa. Why do we do this? Okay, so why don't we just focus on industrial development in South Africa? Why do we also want industrial development to spill over into Southern Africa? The first reason is that we will benefit if we have politically and economically stable neighbors. If there's unrest in our neighboring countries, inevitably we have people from those countries streaming into our country, increasing our problem with unemployment and poverty. They become our problem the minute that they cross our borders. So if we create development in our neighboring countries and we can help them to be politically stable, okay, so no war, no social unrest, we can help them become economically stable, have higher economic growth rates, develop their countries, increase their standards of living, the chances of their people coming here adding to our unemployment and poverty problem is less. We can benefit from that. Okay. Also, they are a source of, they're a market for us. We can export. If the neighboring countries have money, if they develop and they have money, instead of us having to give them money, we can sell them stuff. We sell them stuff and we earn income from them. It is an important market for us. Okay. And very important, a future source of water and energy supplies. All right, we have a lack of water. Our water resources are very scarce in our country. Some of our neighboring countries have water that we can use. Okay, so if we have good relations with them, we can say to them, listen, we're helping you with X, Y, and Z. You help us. You need to give us some of your water, supply us with some of your water. Okay, then to make integration a precondition for support. Okay, in many cases, we also did look at this in chapter 11, right? In order to receive support from foreign investors, from donors, multilateral institutions, whatever, if we are in need, we have to prove that, okay, now we need something, but in the past, when we were okay, we were helping others. All right, we can't just expect other countries to help us all the time. Where we are able to, we need to lend a helping hand to countries that need help from us as well, okay? So foreign investors will not help us unless we can prove that we are helping others as well. All right, and then lastly, to develop a good regional transport system, a solid infrastructure base. Obviously, that is key to attracting investment into the SADC region. We spoke about the SADC also in chapter 5, okay, the Southern Africa Development Community. We have a free customs union there, okay? So obviously we have certain agreements with those countries that we obviously need to stick to, okay? We want to improve competitiveness of the southern region and we want to promote trade. The advantages of corridor developments, okay? Obviously greater levels of efficiency and productivity. If we have industrial development, we produce more, we have the infrastructure, things happen more efficiently. Okay, we can be more productive. It leads to economic growth, right? Compact urban form can be achieved by means of industrial clustering, linking smaller firms to larger firms. Okay, as I said, if we create industrial development, we create growth in one industry, that industry relies on another industry for raw materials. So if we stimulate investment in one industry, that will spill over. Growth in this industry that we are stimulating will spill over to other industries as well. Okay, so bigger businesses will help smaller businesses and smaller businesses then obviously can grow. Okay, corridor developments occur to private investments. That's the idea. Okay, so the advantage here is that it's not going to cost the government a lot of money. The government doesn't have to use a lot of their budget money to create development in these corridors. The idea is that the money has to come from private investment. So this is an advantage for the government. Okay. The integration of land use and transport planning also leads to our efficient use of land. We all know the land issue is a difficult one in our country. There's large pieces of land that is lying there unused. A lot of it is owned by the government. Okay. So we have to make sure that whatever land we've got, we have to use it effectively. Okay, it can't just lie there and do nothing. And by that, I don't mean agricultural land is not lying there doing nothing. Agricultural land is growing food. I'm not saying we need to build a factory on every piece of land. That is not what I'm saying, right? But we have to make sure that every piece of land is being used effectively. Whether it is for agriculture, whether it's used for mining, whether we're going to build a factory on it, whether we're going to put a tourist attraction on it, we have to make sure that all of our land is being effectively used. All right, and then lastly, efficient urbanization also leads to efficient use of land and efficient transport. Okay, in chapter 11, we spoke about urbanization. The thing with corridor developments is that we are developing underdeveloped areas. Now, if we don't do this, obviously there's high levels of unemployment in our underdeveloped areas. If we don't create opportunities for people there in the underdeveloped areas, they are going to urbanize. They're all going to move into the cities where there's not enough job opportunities for everybody, where there's not enough water supply, there's not enough electricity, there's not enough housing, there's not enough sanitation, schools, whatever. It increases the pressure on our cities. So the idea is, instead of people moving to the cities, to the developed areas to find jobs, no, we are going to come to you. We are going to come and do industrial development in your area. We are going to create development in your area so that you can stay in your area and you can find a job and you can improve your life and we can create economic growth. So it stops that urbanization from getting out of control and the pressure on our cities can be relieved. Okay, now on your exam guideline, nothing is mentioned for the infrastructure plan. So you can literally scratch out this paragraph. It's very little, but it's better than nothing, as well as the strategic integrated project, the SIP. Okay, so these last two, 10.3.5 and 10.3.6, you scratch out. It doesn't appear in your guideline, so we are not going to waste time on that. All right, and that is the end of this essay question. Remember, this will not be an essay this year, but it will be there for dart response questions and other questions.